السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أم، بسم الله الذي لا إله سواه، والحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه، حمدا يليق بجماله وجلاله وجزيل وكريم عطائه ونعمائه. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف أنبيائه سيدنا ومولانا محمد الصادق الأمين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين، وعلى آله وأصحابه والتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اجعلنا منهم. Uh, Welcome back, everyone. This is our 11th get together, inshallah, in this Tazkiyatul Nafs course. Um, the whole course is 12 sessions, so we have 10 sessions, 2 sessions to go. So, mashallah, you have persevered. We're almost there in the last mile. And I think at this point, um, we have enough information under our belt and we understand the concepts of Tazkiya and the concept of being mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and mindful of the state of the heart, to the point that I think we can now have a face-off with our hearts. This is a very important topic, not an easy topic, because nobody wants to really look deeply inside and realize, I don't want to realize that I have diseases in my heart. Nevertheless, this is a very important step in the Tazkiyah process. Our sources are the same, the Sahaba Seminary and the Sahaba Essentials. And the question that we are focusing on today and next week, inshallah, is very, very simple. That how does my heart look like? So every person naturally, I'd like to think I have a good heart. Whether it's true or not, that's a different story, but I'd like to think that I have a good heart, a shiny heart. However, the litmus test is if this heart is of mine is put on in front of the mirror of the hearts, how would it look like? Is it really what I think it is like, or very different in an unexpected way? And if it is not to my liking, and most likely all of us will have challenges and issues to work on, then what should I do about that? So just to recap, how did we get here? We have been working on cultivating mindfulness of Allah and the fact that He's looking at me, not just at me, but through me. His gaze, subhanahu wa ta'ala, cuts through me and sees my heart. And then we also understand that the nafs is prone to diseases driven by shahawat and hawa. If you recall, when we discussed the anatomy, the spiritual anatomy of the self, we said that the heart is the prime device I have to understand reality. And that heart is affected by the purity of the ruh from one side and then the nafs from the other side. So the nafs, when we say the nafs, we're referring to the low base desires, is kind of weighing on the heart and demanding things, demanding pleasures, kind of like a child acting up, or a wild horse that is not tamed. And that child wants the candy and wants it now, immediately. Doesn't matter at what cost, doesn't matter whether the candy is healthy or not. It's just like it wants, the child and the nafs wants to indulge in short-term pleasures. So indulge in possibly excessive halal, so not necessarily at the surface it is haram, but like for instance, food, eating. If eating is perfectly halal until it becomes excessive, then there would be issues. And then in demanding excessive halal, also I might cross the line or cross the boundaries into haram. And this is where the trouble begins, or the trouble becomes really, really consequential. And then at the limit, of course, that might lead to kufr. Kufr is a big word. We don't take it easily, but as you'll see in the discussion today, that if I'm not careful with the diseases of my heart, this is where I might end up being. And then the nafs, again, I'm just recapping what we studied together all these weeks. It's kind of like a creature with tentacles, and those tentacles envelop the heart or try to envelop the heart depending on how protective I am of my heart. So the heart ultimately gets infected by the diseases of the nafs. And usually, like, I don't jump into saying diseases of the heart. It starts with diseases of the nafs, and then those diseases of the nafs potentially can infect the heart. And then we kind of made the case, I hope you remember, that it's like a big corporation. The heart is the board of directors of this corporation. The job of the heart is to set direction. Once the direction is set, then it goes to my intellect, my mind, and the mind or the intellect is kind of like the CEO, Chief Executive Officer, the job of whom is to execute on the direction that the heart wants and essentially to make it happen. So, for example, if I have a sound heart, a gift from Allah in the form of a sound heart, and I also have a smart intellect that is educated and informed, then if you put the two together, the good heart and the smart intellect, what comes out of this equation is simply virtue, all kinds of good things. And we've seen this throughout history when Muslims, especially the early days at the time of the Prophet and the Sahaba after, when their hearts were cleansed and became very, very pure and also educated by the knowledge imparted on them by the Prophet ﷺ, what came after that is nothing but virtue. The opposite of that, or in contrast to this, is that if the heart is sick, but still I have a smart intellect, then that would yield or lead to what I call smart evil. This is like prevalent in the first world. That like I'm just trying to make a case here, in the sense that if you look around us in the first world, you'll see that it's led by people who are smart. We cannot like really they are like you cannot argue against that. They have smart intellects. They can plan. They can come up with tight plans and execute on them. Nevertheless, they have sick hearts. And when they put sick hearts with smart intellect, what you get is evil, but smart evil. Now, if you put a sick heart together with a dumb, ignorant intellect, this is the worst because what you get is unjustifiable, beyond imagination, stunning destruction. And an example of this is what's happening in the third world. All what you need to do to prove this is just like watch the news, see what's happening in the first world and contrast this against what's happening in the third world and compare this to our history that is rich of virtue and magnanimity at the times when Muslims were on top of their hearts and on top of their deen. So if I want to kind of summarize this in a schematic, it would look something like this, that we have hearts that are affected by the nafs or nufus, and at the top end of this schematic, what you see is that a heart that is mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, continuously in dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, connected, and that yields or results in a tranquil نفس النفس المطمئنة. يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية. So how do I get to this tranquil nafs that wants to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a big smile? This is where everything that we talked about in this course, the Tazkiyat nafs, where I cultivate mindfulness of Allah and stay in dhikr and connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, pushing and pushing and pushing towards virtue. The mirror opposite end of this, at the very bottom of the diagram, I have a life that is full of heedlessness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not even on my radar screen whatsoever. I'm just chasing dunya, drowning in pleasures, or suffering related to those pleasures, full of sin. And this is what you get from an untamed nafs that is ammara bisu, evil commanding nafs. A nafs that is wild and keeps pulling us down and down and down into the mud. These are the kind of like the positive end and the very negative end. In between, the nafs that is working on itself, the heart that is working on itself, cleansing itself, we get a nafsul lawwama, self-reproaching nafs, in the sense that I commit a sin, I remember, I regret it, I try to fix it, do better, and slip again, and so on. And this is where the mujahada is, because what I want to do is elevate myself up towards a nafs al-mutma'inna and stay away from being at the bottom of the spectrum where I am succumbing and surrendering to the nafs that is ammara bisu, or evil commanding nafs. So what is the connection of this to the heart? If you want to make a graphic out of this, I would say at the bottom end, that if I am surrendering to my nafs and its evil commands, one sin after the other, my heart is covered in ran. بل ران على قلوبهم. Ran means kind of like rust, dark spots that envelop and cover the heart entirely and makes that my heart veiled from goodness, veiled from the truth, veiled from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in our journey of Tazkiya, what I want to do is kind of like I want to break that that rust. I want to break through that run. I know that I have a shiny heart inside, but it's not accessible yet. And this is what we're trying to do, that I am trying to break through the dark matter and reach my heart. Then ultimately, may Allah make us with those, you and us, you and me, if we reach a point where I have a sound heart, sound, solid, shiny heart, free of attachments to dunya, free of sin, then this is the ultimate goal, because this is the angelic heart that sees Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and wants to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger in the hereafter. So this is where we're at in this course, in a sense. And then today we'll start digging deeper into this. So what we want to do, let me go back to my slide here. Sorry. What we want to do is how to cultivate mindfulness of this issue of diseases of the heart, not only to cure it, but also for prevention. Because I don't like the state of my heart and your heart might be at different stages of development. So I want to make sure that I'm able to protect my heart from getting worse and to improve it. So if it is already infected, and trust me, no one is free of heart challenges. So I'm not speaking at you from a high horse, like God knows I have them all. I have all the diseases of the heart, or at least a good number of them. And we try to remind each other and work with each other to cleanse ourselves. So how do I do that? Like a first step that I must know what the diseases are. Last time we kind of like went through them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, and so on, just mentioning them by name, but that is not enough. Like we need to stop at each disease and know those diseases, what they are, how they feel like, what are the differences between the diseases, how they are connected, because as you will see, diseases of the heart come in bundles, come in chains. One feeds into the other, feeds into the other, until like you have a succession or a series of diseases connected to each other. So how are they connected, and how do they manifest in our lives? If allowed to fester, meaning that if I have a disease in my heart, kind of like a seed of a disease in my heart, and I'm not paying enough attention to it, it will grow. And if it grows and festers, where does it take me? How enormous are the consequences? So we need to understand the enormity of these diseases of the heart. And what are their opposites? Because for every disease, there is a cure, as the Prophet ﷺ taught us. So, what is the polar opposite of the disease that if I try to adopt and try to engrave in my heart, then I'm moving in the right direction? And how to combat those diseases in the heart, especially early on, and nip them in the bud before they are allowed to fester and grow. Now, the worst ever that could happen is that I live a life being blind to the diseases of my heart. This is why I'm saying that it's a heavy topic, because I don't want to know that I'm arrogant. I don't want to know that I am greedy. I don't want to know that I have hypocrisy inside of me. I don't want to know that. Kind of like it's a lot easier to kind of stick my head in the sand and not look. Because once I look honestly and sincerely, then I might see what is not going to be pleasing. However, not seeing at all, ignorance is not bliss, in the sense that not seeing the diseases of my heart at all, this is the worst thing that can happen to me. In other words, that seeing the diseases of the heart, of my heart, is actually a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the attitude that we want to approach this topic with. I'm not here to depress you and depress myself. I'm not here to prove that I am good for nothing and the best thing I could do is just crawl in a hole and die or disappear. So, this is not the attitude of the believer. The attitude of the believer is to say, okay, do I have issues? Do I have challenges? What are they? Let's face them and fix them to improve. So what I'm like, we should motivate ourselves to roll up our sleeves and have a face-off with those diseases, with the objective of improving in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the ultimate mission, meaning that ultimately the ultimate goal of all of this is to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala um, uh, with a heart that is in experiential tawheed and has and have beautiful akhlaq, or beautiful character and sound heart. And these are the fruits of the tazkiyah. So tazkiyah, the whole process of tazkiyah is essentially to kind of cleanse my heart of attachments and diseases. And this is the ultimate affirmation of tawheed, that like I'm really in experiential tawheed when my heart is attached to one and only one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have no attachments to anything based in dunya, anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the ultimate affirmation that I'm really a muwahhid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And which means not just external behavior as we discussed, but also my thoughts, my emotions, and of course, my actions are all by Allah and for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I want to shatter that Iran. Look at this picture and look at that Iran, that rust that is engulfing or enveloping the heart. I want to shatter that and get to my true heart, my beautiful heart that is buried deep inside. And this is the ultimate realization of Shahada. Like if somebody asks you, how can I become a Muslim? And I say, okay, say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. Is that it? Is that just lip service? Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. Or Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, meaning I have no attachment whatsoever to anybody but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Muhammad Rasulullah, that my akhlaq, my character, will be like Muhammadan Rasulullah. So this is the ultimate realization of our title or our shahada of La ilaha illallah and Muhammadan Rasulullah. And then, so again, I emphasize that seeing and addressing the diseases of the heart is indeed a gift of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if I don't see the diseases of my heart, I will be abased, I will be depressed, I will be anxious, kind of like this guy that you're looking at. But no, here's the positive news. Know that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes to move us from the humiliation and abasement of sins and disobedience to the glory of obedience, how can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala move us to the glory of obedience? If Allah wishes to move someone from the sinful life to the glory of obedience, what does He do? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, number one, says, آنسه بالوحدة, that He gives us solace in seclusion. I am content, Ya Allah, رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا ومحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم نبيا ورسولا. If I am satisfied with this, if I am with Allah happily in loving submission, this is elevation to the glory of obedience. Number two, وَأَغْنَاهُ بِالْقَنَاعَةِ. أَغْنَاهُ بِالْقَنَاعَةِ, that means makes us content. I'm satisfied with what I have, not comparing myself on Facebook to everybody else that has better. And we talked about this when we talked about gratitude. And then the third one, وَبَصَّرَهُ بِعُيُوبِ نَفْسِهِ, and allows him or her to see their faults. This is the gift. This is what transforms me from someone who's drowning in the humility of sin into being in the glory of obedience. So Allah, so that when Allah gives us those gifts, then this is the best of this world and the hereafter. فَقَدْ أُعْطِيَ خَيْرَ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. So again, I'm trying to be upbeat here a little bit because the topic is heavy. So it is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we reach this point where I can look at my heart in the mirror and figure out what the issues are and work on them. Notice that the mother of all evil is shirk. Shirk associating with Allah, and that doesn't mean shirk as in like in worshiping statues and so on only. We'll discuss that. But if I have shirk, then this is the root cause of all the diseases of the heart. And shirk here, what is meant by shirk is attachment to and worship of other than Allah. Of course, if I worship a statue, for instance, that's the big shirk. But also if I am attached to dunya, money, wealth, mal, jah, power, and so on, this is also a form of shirk or some of the forms of shirk. And this is the root source of every disease of the heart. And then the opposite is also true, that Tawheed, now we understand what Tawheed is, attachment to Allah only, is the root of every virtue and everything beautiful. True happiness, not the happiness of the cow, not the happiness of a hyena, not the happiness of shaitan, but the happiness of the angels. So true happiness, true freedom, true joy, and true satisfaction. And then the condition of the people in shirk at different levels is like a person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran, as we will see, like a person in free fall. Imagine you're free falling from a mountain, blown away by the wind into desolate places, into deserted places, snatched by birds and vultures, no firm ground to stand on, no sense of real security. Like we find security in power, in the job, in money, and so on, and we don't feel secure. So no sense of real security. And the heart, when the hearts are empty, they don't withstand pressure. Imagine that my heart is vacuum from inside. Any external pressure will crush that heart. It will implode. And the opposite is also true. Like before that, so like if the heart, for instance, is full of trepidation, anxieties, and various forms of depression, this is the condition of the person who has shirk. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran, He says, وَمَنْ يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ, those who have associate with Allah any attachment, فَكَأَنَّمَا خَرَّ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ, as if the person is falling from the sky. فَتَخَطَّفَهُ الطَّيْرُ, vultures would snatch him, or the wind will blow them into a remote, desolate place. So this is the condition of the person who has shirk. So what should I do? I have to avoid this at all costs, and I have to work on yaqeen, certitude in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on tawheed, attachment only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on having beautiful akhlaq. Otherwise, I will be as you're looking at in the picture. Okay, so now what? Now, first we need to know some diagnostic tricks. How would I know? So I know now that I want a good heart and I do not want a bad heart. So how would I know where my heart is? How would I know whether my heart is a sound heart or a corrupt heart? So the scholars teach us, alhamdulillah, that there are indicators. Like this is not a mystery. There are indicators that if I carefully look at them, I will be able to figure out whether I have a sick heart or a sound heart. So a sick heart, they say, is the one that has the following attributes. Number one, it's unable to perform its intended functions. What is my heart for? Remember, we discussed that the primacy of the heart, and the heart is the seat of cognition. I see facts, I see realities with my heart. So if my heart is sick, then I will not see the truth as truth, and falsehood as falsehood. We ask Allah to say, "A'udhu billahi," we seek refuge in Allah or we ask Allah for, Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'ah wa arina al-batila batilan warzuqna ijtinabah. Ya Allah, please allow me or enable me to see the truth as truth and see falsehood as falsehood. Could it be otherwise? Is it possible to see the truth as falsehood and falsehood as truth? Yes. Look around us in life. People are confused. People don't see the truth as truth and falsehood. So this is because the heart is sick, and that gives rise to all the confusion. And I also lose the ability, the determination or irada or resolve to be good. So this is a sign of a sick heart. Therefore, if my heart is sick and unable to perceive the knowables, the truth as truth, and has weakened resolve in my journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter, then this right there is indicative of dysfunction and sickness in the heart. So my heart, therefore, is operating intensely through hawa and shahwa. All what I know about this life is I want pleasures, the pleasure of this, the pleasure of that. And then when I'm denied those pleasures for any reason, like for instance, somebody says, oh, don't drink, it's haram, or like don't date, it's haram, then immediately I start justifying and saying, why not? Everybody's doing that. Everybody looks good. Look at the West, they are thriving. And Muslims, we claim that we are about virtue and stuff like that, and we are in shambles. And we forget that we are in shambles because we're not sticking to our deen. And then the sick heart also does not find joy in remembering the divine. Would I go, for instance, to pray or go to a party? If I find myself that I don't find joy with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is a sign of a sick heart. And I also brush aside any the commands of Allah or any advices from the scholars that I should do this and do that. Yeah, okay, I'll look into that later. So I don't take seriously the admonitions and the advices of our deen, of Allah, of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and of the scholars. So these are the signs of a sick heart. So it drowns in sin, it justifies disobedience to itself, and it drowns in sin. Now, what is the opposite of that? What are the signs or indicators of a good heart? A healthy or sound heart is exactly the opposite, that it desires to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're all here. Why are you here tonight? Spending, precious an hour and a half on a Sunday evening because you want to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you have the desire, you're longing to know something about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You want to know how to connect with the divine. Alhamdulillah, this is a good sign. And that heart finds delight in loving obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. Once I hear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves this, I love that too. The Prophet ﷺ used to like that. I like that too. This is a sign of a good heart. And it's a heart that also remembers and prepares for the hereafter. This is not being depressing, like you're talking about death and stuff like, well, we're dying, whether you like it or not. But a smart, remember when we talked about artificial intelligence, a smart, intelligent machine would not fall for short-term reward, but rather accumulates long-term reward. And what is the longest term reward we can dream of? Being in Jannah, being with the Prophet ﷺ, meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while He's pleasing with us. So automatically we have to think beyond this life. And then a heart that is sound and obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in loving surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, automatically will have beautiful akhlaq. I will have gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is beautiful akhlaq. I will have haya from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I avoid sins. I avoid vulgarity and so on. All of these are beautiful products of being close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in short, you could summarize it by saying, when you go to Hajj, for instance, or in the days of Eid, you say, Labbaik Allahumma labbaik. This is the slogan of a sound heart. Ya Allah, just command me, and I say yes. Labbaika Allahumma labbaik. This is the defining slogan of a healthy heart. So now we're starting to learn here, how can I look at my heart and diagnose, self-diagnose where my heart is kind of tending or leaning towards. If I am running away from Allah, then that's indicative of a sick heart. If I'm running towards Allah, that's indicative of a healthy heart, or at least a heart that is in mujahada, striving to be in the nearness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what if diseases overcome me? What are the impacts of that? This is where, Imam al-Hasan al-Basri, I shared this with you before, but it doesn't hurt to say it again. He summarized this in a very, very beautiful teaching. He says, innahum. He's talking about. I think the story is that he was people like a parade was passing by him, and the elite of the people, the rulers or the princes or whatnot, walking with their horses, and the horses, there is a certain walk of the horse where it's kind of like boastful with pride, and then walking on concrete or cobblestone, and you hear the footsteps of the horses like dancing on the cobblestone. So that gives us a sense of, royalty, being great. And he says, إنهم وإن طقطقت بهم البغال وهملجت بهم البراذين إن ذل المعصية لا يفارق قلوبهم أبى الله إلا أن يذل من عصاه. Meaning that if I have those diseases of the heart, I will be abased, I will be lowered. And no matter what signs of worldly success I may have, I might be the trillionaire of the world, but deep down I am overcome by the humiliation of sin. Why? Because Allah, nobody else, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refuses, look at the words, refuses but to humiliate and abase the sinners. This is how serious it is. And the scholars teach us that, if we look at the impacts of the diseases of the heart more deeply, they group them into categories. So very quickly, one group or one impact is the heart becomes blind. The heart becomes blind from experiential tawheed and the path of beautiful akhlaq to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That a skewed heart is like a skewed mirror, or a mirror that's not true, doesn't see realities as they are, doesn't see the truth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His path as the true path, and cannot distinguish good from evil, and those hearts become blinded to the fact that this dunya doesn't last. It's ephemeral. Ephemeral, like how long are we going to live? 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years? You wish for 100 years? It's like this passes like that. So if I'm not aware that life is ephemeral, this is a sign or an impact of a blinded heart. Kind of like, remember when we talked about how a drone can be taught to navigate indoor? If the drone doesn't see those realities, doesn't see its context and the ontology of its existence, then it will bang into the wall and its journey will finish with a crash in very, very little time. Impact number two, there is painful loneliness, especially with the big sins. May Allah protect you and me, that when we fall in a big sin, one feels very, very lonely. Like you just want the ground to open up and swallow me. Not even die, because if I'm sinful, I'm not ready to die. I just want to be dust. ويقول الكافر يا ليتني كنت ترابا. I just want to vanish. If I can vanish, that is the solution. So this is how painful and lonely sins are. And then impact number three, there is negative feedback in the sense that a sick heart produces evil actions. So what do evil actions do? Evil actions produce or increase the sickness of the heart. And sometimes, look at this, sometimes that the punishment of a sin is simply to continue the same sin, that like one would continue sinning the same way, unaware of what is happening, unaware that I am sinning. There is a story, it's kind of similar to this, but not exact, that a abid, like a person worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was saying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabb, kam asaytuka wa lam tahrimni. Something like that, I'm paraphrasing here, that how often did I disobey you, Ya Allah, and you did not punish me? Then it said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds and says, how many times I punished you and you were not aware, that how many times يعني كم عاقبتك أو كم حرمتك ولم تدرك. ما معناه like what it means is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes us and we are not aware. And what is the punishment? That He does not give us solace with Him, that He would disallow us or disqualify us from being near Him. And that in itself is the ultimate punishment. What else? Impact number 4, pain and how to ameliorate or fix that pain. That, for instance, if I make a big sin of fornicate, for instance, God forbid, and I cannot take it anymore, then that that I just want to forget in any way possible. So what do? I drink alcohol, I smoke pot, or do something just to kind of like knock my mind out. So it's like a negative cycle that continues to feed itself, and it leads to excessive behavior, because the more it's kind of like being in quicksand. The more you move, the more you sink. So in this sense, that I'm trying to forget my sins by falling into or drowning into more sins. Number 5, as we discussed with Hassan al-Basri's teaching, that those sins lead to lowliness, low, and uh, debasement and humiliation, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refuses but to humiliate the sinners. And then that would result in weakness, that if I sin, my heart becomes weak, then I lack the resolve. Like how would I do mujahada, for instance, if I have a weak heart? And then ultimately, this is where it's going, that sin leads to ultimately kufr, wal-iyaz billah, because the more I invite sin in my life, the more I'm closer and closer to kufr. I recall discussing with a person, for instance, that I said, okay, such and such is haram, you should not do it. And the person was committed to that sin. I don't want to get into the details, but the person was committed to that sin, wanted to continue in that sin. And then he says, okay, says who? Says who that this is not allowed? I said, the Prophet, ﷺ, Allah says in the Quran, and the Prophet ﷺ said such and such. Says, like, when was that? 1400 years ago in the desert? So immediately, to kind of not argue whether something is allowed or disallowed, just hit at the root of deen altogether and get out of the deen. And that is kufr. So, as we started talking about last time, those sins, diseases of the heart, come in categories, call them character cancers. And those categories, this is not exhaustive, but nice categorization by the Sahaba seminary teachers. One category is diseases at the root of the deen itself. And then the second category, the diseases rooted in the sense of pride. I like myself, I love myself, and so on. And then there are diseases rooted in greed and malice, and diseases rooted in deceit and betrayal, lying, and so on, and diseases of harshness and vulgarity, and diseases related to weakness of the spirit. So tonight, inshallah, we'll focus on the first two only in detail. with the idea of the following, that when we go through these diseases one by one, again, we want to know each disease, what it is, how it manifests, how to combat it, and how they are linked and interconnected. So we'll spend quite a bit of time with the diseases in the first couple of categories, and we'll stop tonight. And then next time we'll continue with the rest at a faster pace, because like we can spend the whole course on these diseases of the heart, but we just want to like catalog them and kind of put together a process where I'm able to recognize and combat each disease. So the diseases at the root of deen, we when in the morning and evening azkar, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika from what? I seek refuge from in you from what? الشك والشرك والنفاق والكفر والشقاق. Doubt, associating partners with Allah, hypocrisy, and disbelief and divisiveness. So let's go one by one. Let's start with shak or doubt. It's obviously it's the opposite of yaqeen or certitude or certainty. And it's all about doubts and misgivings in aspects related to the absolute truth of my deen. Like Islam, is it really, the true religion? Is Allah this? Is the Prophet that? And so on. You start raising questions and raising doubts. There is a difference between doubts and seeking the truth. Like you have the right to ask questions, but there's a difference between a nafs that is asking to learn and improve and a nafs that wants to kind of set itself free to sin, litigate for itself. So the nafs that raises doubts is a nafs that wants to break free of commitment. So and this is, of course, the big, big job of shaitan, because his job is to make us doubt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's propagated through various systems of propaganda at all levels of society and culture, like entertainment, politics, and so on and so forth. Propaganda meaning that, for motives other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, others will try to embed shak in us. Like if you want to kill the Muslim civilizations, make Muslims doubt themselves and doubt their deen. Like Sheikh Mukhtar Maghrawi was sharing with us, and Sheikh Riyad was sharing with us a story about how propaganda works. I'm digressing here, but fairly quickly. In about 100 years ago, smoking cigarettes and tobacco was in fashion. In fashion meaning, like if you watch the old black and white movies and in Egypt and even in the West here, you see in the movie scene, someone meeting someone, giving them a glass full of ice and pouring whiskey in it, and then you light up a cigarette, give you a cigarette, and we both light up a cigarette. Who did that? Everybody, even doctors. Like there are ads on TV where a doctor checking a pregnant woman and giving her a cigarette and lighting a cigarette with her. Shuyukh, Al-Azhar and so on used to smoke. So everybody, there was a phase where everybody was smoking, except women. So it was a man thing, if you will. And then tobacco companies realized that they are doing well in the men segment or sector, but they are doing poorly with women. So what would they do? How can we come up with a propaganda plan that would increase a marketing plan that would increase the consumption of cigarettes in the sector of women? So they started a campaign. They hired some influencers. At the time, the term influencers was not there at the time, but like famous, good-looking women that have a status in society and so on, and decided to go together to New York, walk on the streets of New York, and light up cigarettes, and the campaign was called the Torches of Freedom. So it was sold to the public that if you are a woman and you are somebody that is tired of the male dominant society that give themselves the freedom to smoke, but we women cannot smoke, now this is the torch of freedom, an expression of freedom to light up the torch of freedom, meaning light up cigarettes. And then boom, overnight, the proliferation of cigarettes among women, smoking among women increased, and the tobacco companies doubled their sales. So this is how propaganda work. Now, this applies to everything in society. How, for instance, the West tries to undermine the Muslim countries by making the younger generations doubt their deeds. So what some manifestations of shak is the tendency to imitate others blindly, like the torches of freedom, women imitating men. Cowardice in terms of adherence to the deen. I am in class, for instance, and it's time for prayer, but do I really get up and pray? What about my colleagues? What are they going to say about me? So you become like scared of expressing your deen. And this could lead to hypocritical behaviors. And then, as we discussed, internal lowliness and inferiority that is arising from lack of yaqeen. And then, of the enormity of this disease, which is shak, the ultimate shak is what? Not shak in my how I pray or how I position myself in society, but shak in the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exist? All the agnostic people say, okay, I don't know, I'm not sure. I don't want to think about it. So it becomes irrelevant. And this is the job of shaitan. Therefore, how do I combat this? I have to put myself in a fortress of yaqeen, especially certitude, especially primarily through ilm and amal. What are we doing in this course? We are educating ourselves about our deen, educating ourselves about how to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and practicing that. So that would work against shak, all the cycles of the Tazkiya cycle that we talked about, and murabata, to set conditions for myself, monitoring myself, and hold myself to account and punish myself if need be. All of this is required to work to develop yaqeen and eliminate shak. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sorry, the Prophet ﷺ says in hadith that يا أيها الناس إن الناس لم يعطوا في الدنيا خيرا من اليقين والمعافاة, that, O people, nobody is giving better than certainty of faith, yaqeen in deen, and well-being, mu'afa. فَسَلُوهُمَا Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for yaqeen and mu'afa. And this is precisely what we do in the morning and evening azkar, if you're paying attention to that and practicing that. So this is shak, doubt. What that leads to, the next step, is shirk, associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So shirk is defined as is to attribute something, a created thing or creature, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for example, if I think that Jesus gives me, or Buddha does this to me, or I worship them, it doesn't have to be like worshiping a statue. If I think, for instance, that my wealth is what is needed, I am this and I am that. So this is referred to in the Quran as zulmun azim, the greatest injustice. That this is the ultimate trap by shaitan, by shaitan al-rajim, to make us in shirk. This is like referred to also in our deen as najasa, that spiritual defilement. There is shirk al-akbar, of course, if you worship somebody besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but there's also a shirk al-asghar, that is attachments of the heart to creation and the means of creation. I think that my boss has the power to do this or do that, or my doctor has the power to do this and do that. And this manifests through increased depression and fear. I'm not mutawakkil, I'm not relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm relying on creation, not realizing that creation themselves have no power to give me anything. And this shirk, of course, leads to pain in dunya and punishment on the hereafter, in the hereafter. So what do? I have to focus on Tawheed, practicing my deen. Again, everything that we do in this course is all about that. It's all about cleansing the nafs and cleansing the heart and rectifying the character. So I need to work on my Tawheed, practicing my deen in all its aspects and surrounding myself with people who help me do that. Remember, the first things we learned in this course is suhbah, is good companionship, because the good companions will help me avoid that. If I mingle with people who don't even know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or have shakk and shirk in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what do you think I will be? I also have shakk and shirk. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah At-Tawbah, يَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِنَّمَا الْمُشْرِكُونَ نَجَسٌ, that polytheistic people are spiritually impure, much like any other najasa, spiritual impurity. And then in Surah Luqman, Prophet Luqman alayhi salam, when he was teaching his son and while he's giving him advice, he says, يا بني لا تشرك بالله إن الشرك لظلم عظيم. So how does described in the Quran that association with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, big or small, at the level of lordship, at the level of uluhiyya, or at the lower level of, like, I care about what people think of me and whatnot. All of this is great injustice. Surah Al-An'am, الذين آمنوا ولم يلبسوا إيمانهم بظلم, those who believe and do not mix their belief with injustice, again referring to shirk. The third disease is nifaq, or hypocrisy. So the scholars define this, that Imam al-Nawawi, for instance, rahimahullah, says that nifaq is expressing outwardly the opposite of what I harbor inside. So essentially, I'm wearing a mask. I am double-faced. If this left unchecked, then it strengthens, this disease strengthens and leads to kufr. And nifaq actually is the worst crime after shirk. Actually, this is something new that I learned in this course, that in the context of aqidah or creed of Islam, nifaq is equivalent to kufr. Like there is nifaq in mundane matters, everyday life, but once nifaq makes its way to deen, then it becomes kufr, because it entails harboring inside of me a rejection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messengers and his messenger and his followers, and then I attach to something else or somebody else, or partner with others, and so on. So I behave externally as a Muslim, while internally I reject that. And this is very, very ugly and very dangerous. Therefore, the munafiq is the worst of creatures in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is nifaq asghar, the lesser nifaq, when one tries to kind of express goodness in action in general in mundane aspects of life, but harbor otherwise inside the heart. I meet my boss, for instance, I hate their guts, and he or she says something, says, "Ah, how nice, how beautiful, how funny." and then inside of me, I'm cursing and saying bad stuff. Um, so nifaq manifests in ugliness of action and speech and intention. And therefore, what should I do is work on the opposite of that, is to be sadiq, sidq. And this is step number one in our course when we said we start with sidq, sincerity in seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, I have to work with all the tools that we learned, the Tazkiya cycle, the Murabata cycle, because this the cycle of commitment, oversight, accounting, and course correcting. And also another way to combat nifaq is actually to think about the day we meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after we die. So what good are double dealings when it will be revealed in the akhirah? Maybe I can say sweet words to you and I'm harboring bad stuff inside of me, and then in front of Allah everything will surface. So and Abdullah ibn Umar hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says that the traits of a hypocrite are four traits that if I have them all, then I am a pure hypocrite. And if I have one or two or a few, then I have a trait of hypocrisy that I should work on until I get rid of it. What are the four traits, Ya Rasulullah? He says, number one is Atumina Khan, that if he is entrusted with something, then they betray the trust. This is number one. Number two, وَإِذَا حَدَّثَ كَذَبَ, when he speaks, he lies, he or she lies. And وَإِذَا عَاهَدَ غَدَرَ, when he promises, then they don't live up to their promises and act treacherously. And وَإِذَا خَاصَمَ فَجَرَ, that when we argue together or fight together, then I would act very, very in a harsh manner. You know, in Egypt, المصريين, they say ترميني بالمية أرميك بالدم or بالنار, meaning that if you just like hurt me a little, I'll just like kill you. So with the خاصمة فجر. سورة النساء, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says إن المنافقين في الدرك الأسفل من النار, that the hypocrites are in the lowest depth of the fire. They are even worse than the disbeliever because of this issue of being double-faced. The Prophet ﷺ says that إِنَّ شَرَّ النَّاسِ ذُو الْوَجْهَيْنِ, the worst of people are the double-faced ones. الَّذِي يَأْتِي هَؤُلَاء بِوَجْهِ وَهَؤُلَاء بِوَجْهِ, who comes to some people with one face and to the others with another face. So this is hypocrisy. Where is this going? Goes to kufr, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, disbelief. That what is kufr? Linguistically, kufr is from cover, like to cover something or hide something. So what is the kafir covering? The kafir is covering his fitra, his or her innate fitra, with the cover of this belief. The early stages of kufr arise like in the form of kufran and na'am. Kufran and na'am, that somebody does something good to me and I'm not grateful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing all kinds of na'am on me and I'm not grateful. So ingratitude to goodness that others show me, particularly, most importantly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is a form of kufr, of ni'am, showing ingratitude. And of course, sins are stepping stones towards kufr. I gave you the example that, you know, a person is a sinner and wants to persist in the sin, and then when faced with the fact that this is not allowed, says who? Hadith, what is that? Quran, what is that? Allah, who's that? وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. So ultimately, to free ourselves from the pain of sin, we might resort to rejecting deen altogether. This is the easiest way out of the pain of sin, is to disbelieve, like seemingly easy, is to disbelieve altogether in the deen. And of course, if it's untreated, that is, kufr is untreated, then it will ultimately lead to shiqaq, divisiveness, and brazen open calls against deen. What is that, and why is it coming after kufr? Shiqaq is, this is the end of the chain, if you will. Like there is a chain of diseases. It starts with shak, then shirk, then nifaq, then kufr, then shiqaq. Shiqaq um, um, is to kind of crack something that the nafs is rebelling, and in its fullest form, it's an open expression of dissension against Allah and His Messenger and Muslims. You see people, for instance, who write books, Muslims, who write books against Islam and or like apparently Muslims, and say this is a satanic verse and Muslims are backward and evil and this and that. So, and they are coming from within or from among Muslims. So not only passive kufr in the sense that I don't believe, period, but they are actively fighting against Islam and against the deen. And this dissension begins internally. I would have shiqaq inside of me, and then extends to the level of family and society, and becomes to the point that I start fighting against our own community and and against Muslims. Then, of course, like all the other diseases, you see the commonality here. To combat this, one has to work on beautiful akhlaq and engaging in the tazkiya cycle. And in society, I must actively work to cultivate bonds amongst Muslims, not create separations and shiqaq and cracks in the Muslim community. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Sad says, بَلِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فِي عِزَّةٍ وَشِقَاقٍ. Yet the disbelievers are entrenched in arrogance and opposition. So you see right there that we have a series of diseases that are interconnected and feeding into each other, and all of them are aiming at the deen itself, at the core of our deen or our faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. What does that tell us? That this is very, very, very serious. We work against it and seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from all these diseases. The next series of diseases is also very, very serious. Again, in the morning and evening azkar, and please practice the morning and evening azkar. We seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It says, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-kibr wal-ujub wal-ghurur wal-sum'a wal-riya wal-khuyala. I seek refuge, and all of these are related to self-love and self-pride. And I want you to contrast that to the society in modern times that we live in, where feeding the self is of prime importance. In Islam, it's the opposite. I don't feed the self, I tame the self. I don't seek freedom for the self, I seek freedom from the self. All of these are principles of Tazkiya, as we've been discussing all along. So we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from what? Arrogance, self-admiration, self-delusion, desire for reputation, ostentation, and conceit. So let's go through them one by one quickly. Kibr or arrogance, look at the picture. So I think I am, simply put, better than you. So exaltation of the self, rejection of the truth. You tell me something that is truthful, I don't care, I am better than you. Who are you? Looking down at others. So kibr or arrogance is neither natural nor rational, because our true reality, all of us, you and I and everything in creation, we are all dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are all contingent. The only independent being, necessary being in existence is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything else, everybody else is contingent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what makes you better than me or makes me better than you? Then the mutakabbir, or the person that has arrogance, is the one that puts great effort to position themselves as greater than what they are, with complete unawareness of our true state of poverty and destitution, faqr, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Examples of kibr in society, for instance, or arrogance in society, we see them every day, include racism, include apartheid, look at Israel, for instance, nationalism, supremacy, and so on. All of these are manifestations of kibr in society. In matters of deen, is to argue against deen without proper authority. That shaitan, that's the original sin of shaitan. What did shaitan do that is wrong? He was mutakabbir, he had kibr. Ana khayrun min, I am better than him. What is this Adam creature that you're asking me, Allah, asking me to prostrate to? No, absolutely not. I am better than him. You created me from fire and you created him from clay. First of all, it's wrong argument. Who says that fire is better than clay to start with? But even if it were, the issue here is that shaitan had kibr in him, that he felt superior to others to the point of disobeying a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a direct command. And shaitan didn't have shak in Allah, wasn't certain that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists or not, that they're like talking one on one. Yet he disobeyed. So his disobedience was not because he's not certain whether there is Allah or not, but because he had kibr. And then, of course, this disease veils me from recognizing and following the truth. That when I tell you, for instance, or somebody tells me that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says such and such, no, I think differently. And then this kibr, arrogance, leads to other diseases, because we're dealing with a set of diseases that are also connected in a chain, as we mentioned them in the word and as we will discuss shortly. So all of the diseases related to the nafs and self-love and so on are different permutations of being enchanted with the self. I like me, or I think that I am better than everybody else. And one of the best ways the scholars teach to kind of combat kibr, in addition to practicing the Tazkiya cycle and so on, is through service to others. Lower your wing to others, including the parents, of course, but to others in the community. Like some scholars, for instance, we hear about the scholars that when they felt that they have so many followers, they go and clean a bathroom. Why would they clean a bathroom? To kind of like break that entrenched potential. They didn't have that disease, but to break the potential for feeling that, wow, I am better than them. So go clean the toilets so you would not feel better than them. Al-kibr بطر الحق وغمط الناس. The hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says that kibr, or arrogance, is the rejection of the truth, like shaitan rejected the truth from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and despising people, looking down at people. As we know about shaitan in Surah Al-A'raf, قَالَ مَا مَنَعَكَ أَلَّا تَسْجُدَ إِذْ أَمَرْتُكَ. What prevented you, O shaitan, that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking, from prostrating to Adam as I commanded you, or when I commanded you? He said, قَالَ أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِنْهُ. I am better than him. Now, what is that? That is kibr. خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين. created me from fire and created him from clay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Ghafir says إن الذين يجادلون في آيات الله بغير سلطان أتاهم إن في صدورهم إلا كبر ما هم ببالغيه فاستعذ بالله إنه هو السميع البصير. That those who argue without knowledge, without proof, you created me from fire and created him from clay. What do you know about fire and clay? Who says which is better? So those who argue without knowledge and without proof, they have nothing in their heart but kibr. And then the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to say, فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّهُ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. Seek refuge in Allah. When do I seek refuge in Allah? In the morning azkar, in the evening azkar. Here's a beautiful one. There is a story that, you know, about uh, Malik ibn Dinar. Malik ibn Dinar is one of the scholars of the heart. He was, you know, in a place and a man passed by him, the man called Al-Muhallab ibn Abi Sufra. So just, you know, he was sitting, this man is walking by, and then he was very boastful, you know, when you walk like head up, chest open, muscles to the side and stuff like, you know, yatabakhtar, that walking a walk with showing off and full of arrogance, nose up and so on. So when Malik ibn Dinar saw the man walking like this, I was like, whoa, hey, did you not know that walking like this is despised by Allah or disliked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except in war? Like if you are, for instance, preparing your army and showing off against the enemy, then it is allowed to kind of like walk with like glory and so on to show off strength and so on. Other than that, it is not allowed. So one has to humble down and walk slowly and humbly, not in an arrogant way. So he said, didn't you know that it is bad to walk showing off like that? So the man responded, didn't like that. I said, like, do you know who I am? Do you know who you're talking to? Meaning, you know, I'm great. Do you not, I'm entitled to walk like that because I'm great. Then Malik ibn Dinar replied, he says, indeed, I know you very well. أعرفك أحسن المعرفة. So the man replied, okay, so what do you know about me? Kind of challenging him. What do you know about me? He says, well, I know that you began your life as a putrid drop of semen, like a smelly drop of semen. أما أولك فنطفة مذرة. And then, so that's the beginning. That's the beginning of the human being, a drop of semen. And then your end, i.e., when you die, you will be a foul, decaying corpse. وأما آخرك فجيفة قذرة. Once we are put in the grave, give it a few days and we're rotting. So this is the end. You start as a drop of semen and end as a decaying corpse. And in between, i.e., in between the beginning and the end, وأنت بينهما تحمل العذرة. عذرة meaning that between your beginning and end, you are carrying filth and excrement, meaning that's the polite way or sophisticated way to say poop. So what do we do in the bathroom? So this is the man that is boasting, started with a drop of semen, ending with being a rotten corpse, and in between full of it. Then the man was shocked and says, yes, indeed, you know who I am. So if this is our condition, how can we boastful and have kibr? The Prophet ﷺ says, من كان في قلبه مثقال ذرة من كبر حرم الله عليه الجنة. That whomever has an atom weight of arrogance, he will not see paradise. This is how serious it is. Then the next disease in the series is the ujb, self-admiration. Self-admiration is the inner state of vanity. I like me. So I look at myself with a sense of admiration and wonder. So how is that different from kibr or arrogance? It's a bit different. It's similar, but a bit different in the sense that kibr or arrogance requires two. So if I am better than you, there is me and you. While ujb or self-admiration doesn't require the other. I just like myself, period. I don't care if you exist. And then it manifests in being impressed by my knowledge, my wealth, my physical strength or societal strength or power, or even, like, here's the scary part, or even spirituality. I think that I know something or two about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so I'm a spiritual being, and you're not. So once I have that feeling, that's also ujb or self-admiration, which is what? A disease of the heart. And other indicators that I have this disease is that, for instance, including lack of ability to accept criticism. Somebody says, don't do this, it's haram, it's disliked, then no, like I don't want to hear that. So part of the spiritual development or tarbiyah in the Tazkiya path is to rid myself of this disease of ujb. I must engage in muhasaba, again, the Tazkiya cycle and all the attachments to the Tazkiya cycle. I engage in self-accounting and look at what deeds I may present to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and purify myself. So when I lower myself and humble myself, particularly in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then one becomes ennobled in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That if you humble yourself down, Allah would elevate you and increase you. Imam al-Ghazali says, العجب هو استعظام النعمة والركون إليها مع نسيان إضافتها إلى المنعم. That when ujb is, or self-admiration, is to take a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me, not because I have it, whether it's wealth or health or status or position in society or whatnot. All of these are gifts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I take these and remove Allah from it. إنما أوتيته على علم عندي. This is me because of me and because of my abilities. And I forget to attribute those blessings to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ teaches us in a hadith that it says, ثلاث مهلكات, three destructive vices. What are they? شح مطاع, covetousness that is obeyed, I become miser. وهوى متبع, inclination to follow my thinking and my own opinion and so on. وإعجاب المرء بنفسه, and self-admiration or the admiration of the person of him or herself and their opinion. So kibr, then ujb. Then the third one is ghurur, delusion. I am a mouse and I look in the mirror and I see a lion, meaning that I am deceived by my true size, and I don't see my true size. I see myself as much grander than what I am. And of course, this disease of ujb that we previously discussed, if I like myself and let that fester in me, then that will consequently lead to ghurur. I become deluded. So if I overdo ujb, I like myself too much, then all of a sudden I'm even inflating myself beyond my true size. So at its root, ghurur entails the inability to perceive reality as it is. I don't see my true size. And subsequently, reluctance to heed beneficial advice or counsel. If somebody says, humble down, you're not that magnanimous, then of course I don't see that. And shaitan is al-gharur because he deceives us, the grand deceiver. And to be a victim of ghurur is to actually be a victim of shaitan. So ghurur might manifest in life, day-to-day life, mundane issues, but when it makes its way to relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this becomes disaster. And therefore, it's like we have to combat that. And one way to combat this, as all the other diseases, is to acquire ilm and the necessary knowledge to cure myself against self delusion. Practice tazkiya and be open to counsel and advice from others. And always measure myself that the distance between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is measured by how distant I am from the Shara, from the Quran, from the Sunnah. That tells me right away whether I am self-inflated or not. We ask Allah, قل اللهم مالك الملك تؤتي الملك من تشاء وتنزع الملك ممن تشاء وتعز من تشاء وتذل من تشاء. Oh Allah, you are the one who gives authority to whomever you please and remove it from whomever you please. And you honor whomever you please and disgrace whomever you please. So we seek refuge in Allah from being thinking of myself beyond what I'm truly am. Related to this, to the disease of sum'ah. Sum'ah meaning I want to be known. So, like if I have something that I think is good, whether it's like money or power or this or that, or even righteousness and deen, I want others to know. I want everybody to know. This is like an oral form of ostentation or riya, as we'll discuss in the next disease. So the signs that I love sum'ah, reputation, is feeling desperate for worldly status and elevation. I want recognition. I want, of course, that would make me inflate my deeds and become insincere. And then I become heedless to Allah's overarching power and ability over me. And this couldn't be more manifest in society nowadays than throughout all various forms of digital platforms, whether you're on Facebook or Instagram or X or this and that. I want people to know me. Even if I eat a plate somewhere, I take a picture and put it online. What am I waiting for? When you take a picture of your steak and put it online, somebody will give you a heart, somebody will give you a like. So this is a desire for being watched and being known. And unfortunately, I say this with a heavy heart that on the job, when we work in the professional environment here in the West, we are trained to do that. Like, what do you do in LinkedIn? Except that you sneeze, they say, okay, I had the honor of sneezing in that conference. Look at me. So we are trained to do this. Some of you are professors at other universities. The other day, we submitted a multi-million-dollar proposal to the government for research funding. And then you have to write pages and pages and pages about myself that, you know what, if it were not for me, the sun would not come out tomorrow. So keep talking about myself and my reputation and whether I have recognition. I'm recognized by my peers. I'm recognized nationally and internationally and yada, 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 and so on. So we are trained to do that. And sometimes, here's the rub, inflate that. So when you put your resume together, for instance, it doesn't hurt to kind of spice it up with a few lies to kind of give yourself a better reputation. While on the other hand, I should recognize, my utter dependence on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything I am is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll take another, I don't want to break the subject, forgive me, so we'll take a few more minutes to finish this series of diseases, and then we'll wrap up. So if I want a reputation, I should seek a reputation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to see me. I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to kind of speak good of me amongst the angels, for instance, not seeking recognition from people. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Man samma'a samma'a Allahu bih," meaning that whomever seeks the approval of others, i.e., seek reputation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make him known in a bad way, that you will be scandalized and you will be humiliated in public because you're seeking your reputation. All of a sudden, boom, something shows up on social media and everybody's talking about you in a negative way. وَمَنْ يُرَائِ يُرَائِ اللَّهُ بِهِ. Whomever shows off their deeds, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will expose them on the day of judgment. Ibn Ata'illah, one of the masters of the heart, says, "Idfin wujudaka fi ard al-khumul," that bury your existence, don't try to be famous, bury your existence in the earth of obscurity. Obscure yourself, because he says that whatever sprouts, فَمَا نَبَتَ مِمَّا لَمْ يُدْفَنْ لَا يَتِمُّ نِتَاجُ, meaning anything that grows, sprouts, without having first been buried in the soil, will not flower properly. Meaning that don't prematurely seek sum'ah and reputation. And then that leads to riya. Riya essentially is being in vulgar display of yourself, especially of wealth and luxury and so on, to impress others. But the desire to be seen by others in matters of deen, that becomes riya. So sum'ah is in general, all aspects of life. I want people to know me and I want to be famous, yada, yada, yada. But in deen in particular, that's a much bigger problem. That I want people to know that I'm a sheikh, I want people to know that I'm righteous and this and that. Then there is a very serious issue here of riya, ostentation, because I'm trying to show off my deen. Therefore, I must have to be very, very careful about riya in mundane issues like everyday life, but particularly in matters of deen. So this is my buffer zone, because riya is a form of shirk and is a spiritual najasa or contaminant that results in being abd of people and abd of reputation, and so on. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for instance, in Surah Al-Ma'un says, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. So woe to the hypocrites who pray, yet they are unmindfulness of their prayer. Those who only show off. You pray to show off. وَمَا أُمْرِوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. In Surah Al-Bayyinah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says they were only commanded to worship Allah with sincerity, being pure to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّ الرِّيَاءَ الشِّرْكُ الْأَصْغَرُ, that showing off in deen, riya, ostentation, is a lesser shirk. The Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith that inna yasir al-riya'i shirk, that the slightest form of riya or ostentation is a form of shirk. So if you put it together, the essence of sum'ah and riya is being self-centered. It's all about me, performing in front of others, pretty much like an animal in a circus that I am performing to get some sugar cubes of dunya. What is a like? What is a heart on social media except a sugar cube of dunya? So I'm clinging to the creation, to the khalq, and turning away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Finally, the last one is khuyala. Khuyala is to externalize that and externalize, show off excessively with pride, especially with wealth and material possessions. The car, my car is Ferrari, $500,000 and painted and it's gold plated, and my house is this, and the brands I wear are that, and so on. And actually, we all fall prey to this because when we shop, for instance, we look for brands. Maybe we look for them on sale, but we look for brands. So again, one has to be very careful that I am not in khuyala, to externally display the kibr that I have inside of me. So all of these diseases are focusing on the self and emanate from attachments to dunya, attachments to creation, and to my nafs in particular. So the way I act and behave, and ultimately the way I live my life, is simply expression of these attachments that I must break away from. So it's a chain, as we discussed, that there is kibr, I am better than you, then ujb, I actually like me, then ghurur, I overdo it, then sum'a, I want everybody to know that I'm great, and then sum'a in deen, that becomes riya, and then I show off, this is khuyala. So we finish up by just summarizing important points that when we say shirk, for instance, shirk doesn't necessarily mean stone idols. Like as we discussed, like diseases at the root of deen are in a chain: shak, shirk, nifaq, kufr, shiqaq. And then diseases at the root of the self-pride are also in a chain: kibr, ujb, ghurur, sum'a, khuyala. What is more is that they are connected and self-feeding into each other. So for example, shirk is not about external statues that you're seeing in the picture here. What about the internal idols that I have inside of me? Like what? What about the idol of status? What about the idol of control? The idol of pride? The idol of ego? The idol of being seen? The idol of being wanted and loved and needed? The idol of being praised by others? The idol of the need to be right? I am right and you are wrong. The idol of attachment to people and things. The idol of I, just I, one letter that couldn't be more destructive. I am the one. I am the doer. I am enough. All of these are idols. The idol of spirituality, and this is the scary one, that when we sometimes we seek spirituality for spirituality, not for Allah. Spirituality is to connect with Allah. So what I'm seeking is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I'm seeking spirituality for the joy of spirituality, that's an idol. And the idol of our idea of God, the God that agrees with me and disagrees with my enemy and punishes my enemy. So all of these are like idols. Like idols are not necessarily just stone. They are all false gods that the nafs creates. They are all taghut that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran: من يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها. If you disbelieve in taghut, what is taghut? Everything we just talked about, all the idols. If you disbelieve in taghut and believe in Allah and only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is you're holding into something strong. That those idols, here's the challenge, that those inner idols that we discussed are much harder to smash than stone idols. When we see in the movies that somebody is taking an axe and destroying a statue, that's easy. But the challenge is destroy the statues inside of me, my inner idols. Because only when my nafs and my heart is free of the inner idols, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take their place in my heart and fill my heart with nur. So only then, when I get rid of these idols, that I will live not from control, but from peaceful surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not from fake identity that I am this and I am that, to submission to the real Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we transform this way together, inshallah, then we feel peace. We see the light. We walk slower. We speak softer. and we become the Khalifa that man is intended to be and as manifested in the character of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I apologize sincerely for taking longer, but I didn't want to break the topic. With this, we can stop here, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.